So I'm going to hand it over to Rabbi Fedegrin. I'm personally so excited to hear from Rabbi Bashevkin. As it happened, Rabbi Bashevkin is really the perfect person to lead this off. He's dedicated his life to keeping the flame of Judaism burning bright, even in these incredibly challenging times, and making sure that it's authentic and real in a modern world. And, Rabbi Bashevkin, you mentioned that you've been here in Vancouver, and Rabbi Rosenblatt always teaches us about Yehuda Halevi, referencing that Cordoba was, of course, the uttermost west. Well, here we are in the middle of a pandemic, unable to travel, really at the westernmost edge of the Jewish world. And so to have you join us tonight and help us continue to kindle and nurture our Jewish spirit is really a blessing. So thank you so much. I'll hand it over now to Rabbi Fedegrin.
Thank you, Jonathan. And really thank you, Rabbi Bashevkin, for coming and joining with us and to speak with us. I want to give just a really brief introduction to this talk and to Rabbi Bashevkin. Chazal teach us, our rabbis teach us, Ein habayshin lomed, that somebody who's embarrassed never learns. Somebody who's embarrassed to ask questions, to seek advice, and to really learn from others, they never learn. And my claim to fame is that I went to high school with Rabbi Bashevkin, who was 2 years older than me, and with Rabbi Rosenfeld, who was 2 years younger than me, who was here before the pandemic, Rabbi Joey Rosenfeld. So that's my claim to fame. But I've known Rabbi Bashevkin for a number of years, and when I think of Rabbi Bashevkin, that's what I think of. Ein habayshin lomed. He is somebody who is very curious, and he asks questions often, and he learns from his rebbeim, his teachers, from those around him, and he's really gained a lot from it. And he's really somebody who, through his website, as he will explain, is somebody who's searching, constantly searching, and he wants to share his knowledge with others. That which he's accumulated over the years of really searching, he wants to really share that with others. And it's really a wonderful opportunity that we have to learn from him. In a month and a half, it will be Pesach. Pesach is coming shortly. And the highlight of the Seder is really the questions that we ask. It's really all about becoming curious and asking the questions. And he asks questions that some of us are a little bit afraid to ask, as he will probably explain. Rabbi Bashevkin, to introduce him, he's currently the director of education in NCSY. And so he's very much involved in education and education of teenagers. He was here as part of NCSY a little while ago, I think a bit over a year ago. And he also recently created this new website, 1840, which is really, I would really highly recommend either during this class or afterwards to really check it out, look it up, as he will discuss it. And it's a great website, and it really delves into topics that few have really dealt with in a really detailed manner. So without further ado, thank you, Rabbi Bashevkin, and we'll bring it over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And even virtually, though I've been here in person and know how charming and special the Vancouver community is, even virtually, it's incredibly special. I'll be honest, I'm a little distracted. I'm trying to figure out who the 100-year-old is on the call. I'll just make a disclaimer. It's not me. I'm not quite there, but it's very exciting to be on a call with such diversity of experience. Camila's kids seem to be gone, but they were extraordinarily, they're right there. Okay, very sweet to look at. And maybe at the end, I'll get a prize if I figure out who the 100 or the centenarian is on the call, but that's very, very exciting and really a privilege. I want to talk tonight. I don't want to plug. I'm not looking to plug anything. I'm not looking to plug my site. I really want to talk about the moment that we are in religiously, the moment in time that I believe all of us are struggling to articulate that we are a part of religiously, and to describe what are the ways in which we need to confront this moment, maybe differently than we have in previous struggles and previous moments in Jewish history. And I want to begin by giving an outline, again, situated in this initiative that we've begun called 1840. You can look at the site. I teach in Yeshiva University, so I know that whenever I'm on Zoom and I look at somebody, I'm always asking, I'm not busting anybody's chops. You know, I said, what are you looking at now? You trading stocks? Are you on Netflix right now? I have no problem if you want to look at other things, but I'll recommend the site if you're ones that will want to scroll and look at something as I speak. Why not scroll on the site and look at it, though? I'll show you what that is too. The site is 18forty.org, 1840.org. Now, I want to tell you, it's a very strange name. Why on earth did we name our site 1840? Is it like after Nate Silver? Is it after a New York Times project? It's very popular right now to name things after dates or numbers. I want to explain why, because I believe 1840, the calendaric year, 1840, is really repeating. Time very often, especially in Jewish history, is iterative. It repeats itself. And the moment that we are in now, I believe, is couched in experiences and struggles that we have already seen once before in Jewish history, namely the calendaric year 1840. Now, what a terrible name for an initiative, like after such a random name. You know, Jews love good old-fashioned initiatives that have the letter J in them. We like our J acronym initiative, you know, J Learn, J Excitement. We have NJOP, Jewish Outreach. We have all sorts of acronyms with J. So why didn't we go with a normal Jewish initiative and find some good acronym that we could call after this site? So allow me to take you on a little bit of a journey through history to explain and to couch the moment that we're in. And then we'll come to the year that we're in now, 2021, to explain why specifically this was the medium and these were the issues that we set up to explore Jewish thought, Jewish ideas that we're in right now. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I don't want anybody to panic. I prepared some sources. I'm going to make them really, really big because I know via Zoom you can't see anything. It's very difficult to see anything, but I'm going to make them very, very big so they're really easy to see. If they're not easy to see, Rabbi Rosenblatt, you can tell me, you can unmute yourself. You have my full permission to unmute yourself at any point. But
it looks clear to me.
Looks clear to you, great. I want to begin with a New York Times book review of a book by Orlando Feiges called The Europeans. This is where I began my journey of seeing the incredible significance of the calendaric year 1840. If you look, the title of the book is Three Cosmopolitan Lives and the Making of European Culture. This is how the book review begins. Imagine a society wherein within the space of a single generation, human innovation all but collapses the most formidable geographic distances, allowing individuals and information to travel the globe with unprecedented swiftness and ease, where new platforms radically transform the ways in which news, music, books, and art are created and consumed, where media-driven celebrity trumps older modes of authority and forms new elites, endowing famous artists and performers with peerless cachet, where audiences converge in a worldwide culture of sharing, and diversity and connectedness join equality and freedom as the shibboleths of Western liberalism, where at the same time legislation struggled to keep pace with technological change, capitalism and consumerism destroy even as they enrich, and nationalism, racism, and xenophobia poison the public discourse, threatening disaster. This is the society Orlando Feiges examines in The Europeans, Three Lives and the Making of a Cosmopolitan Culture. And it is the world of mid-19th century Europe, an international culture that vanished on the outbreak of the First World War. The Europeans begins by discussing the inauguration in the 1840s of Europe's first railroad lines. The world that this is describing is deliberately, the description is deliberately parallel to our own. if when you thought of a world where human innovation all but collapses the most formidable geographic distances, and you thought for the moment that you're in, that David Bashevkin in Teaneck, New Jersey, is at 10 p.m., is talking to a group of people in Vancouver, Canada at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m., I don't even know what time it is at where you are.
7.
And the geographic distance has suddenly collapsed. New platforms come out, music, books, and this culture of sharing. I was thinking of TikTok when I read this. Many of you may have been thinking of Facebook or Instagram. This is talking about a world of Charles Dickens and celebrity suddenly emerging and capturing the popular zeitgeist and the popular culture. There's no question that the advent of technology in 1840, which began with the railroad system and the telegraph, and allowed technology and information to be shared in ways previously unseen in human history, upended the very way that our relationships form with one another. Now, this did not just have trickle downs in humanity, it specifically upended and had very specific implications for the Jewish world. And let's explore a little bit more of that now, of what was happening in the Jewish world in 1840. Perhaps the most famous incident that took place in 1840, though so much happened, is described in a fabulous book by Abraham Karp. Abraham Karp was a Jewish historian, a conservative rabbi who wrote an absolutely brilliant book that I would recommend to anybody who's trying to look and discover the foundations of Jewish life that we live in today. His book is called Jewish Continuity in America. It's equally relevant if you live in Canada, Creative Survival in a Free Society. Listen to what he describes was happening in 1840. Initially, attempts were made to fashion an American Judaism. The first attempt, again, American Judaism, he's not talking about the United States necessarily. He's talking about a Judaism outside of Europe, a Judaism that's not based in the shtetls in Lithuania and Poland and Russia, that perpetuated most of Jewish life, for sure Ashkenazic Jewish life for centuries. And he describes an America that crossed the Atlantic and started to bubble up all throughout North America. Initially, attempts were made to fashion American Judaism. The first attempt at a national religious union had its roots in a far-off anti-Jewish outrage, the so-called Damascus Affair. The Damascus Affair was about the disappearance of a Catholic priest in Damascus in February of 1840. The Jews of Damascus were accused of his murder in order, and Pesach is coming up soon because Purim is around the corner. And we know that in Jewish history, when Pesach would come, there were blood libels. The Jews of Damascus were accused of his murder in order to take his blood for use in their unleavened bread. This was a blood libel. Scores were imprisoned, children were seized and held as hostages, and a wide-scale massacre was imminent. Jewish communities the world over were shocked and aroused, and those who dared organize and speak protest did so. The news from Syria in 1840 galvanized the Jews of America into action. The Jews of New York, Philadelphia, Cincinnati, and Richmond united in communal expression of horror, sympathy, and indignation. Participation in a common cause that so excited the emotions brought the scattered and disparate elements of the American Jewish community together in a communion of spirit and concern. It has been suggested that modern Jewish history dates from the Damascus Affair, 1840. Why does that mean? He gives it an idea. He says certainly the American Jewish community had its beginnings as a self-conscious entity in the activity precipitated by the Damascus Affair. For the first time ever, the Jews across the Atlantic Ocean, us, Jews of Canada, Jews of the United States, for the first time had to look at themselves and say, what's our responsibility in this? What's our responsibility in the larger community of Jewish peoplehood? I love the term national self-consciousness, the self-consciousness that we are a unique entity as a part of the collective Jewish peoplehood. And the aspect of unity is important too. It was the first time that Jews of different denominations consciously consider, should we be getting together? You know, I don't know every community has its own politics, and maybe I'll never get invited again to even bring up the word Jewish politics. But anybody who's ever served in a Jewish organization or a Jewish shul knows it's like the UN when it comes to logos on flyers and who's going to be included. Okay, got the Federation logo on top. We'll put the local shul. No, the local shuls can't go on the bottom. The local shul got to go in the middle, but we're contributing a different amount. We want our logo a little bit bigger. When Jews get together and create a flyer, if you've ever been involved in this behind the scenes, it's literally like brokering a peace deal in the Middle East. It's serious work. This was the first time that we, so to speak, created a flyer of national Judaism, where different denominations and Jews from different backgrounds had to coordinate their efforts and for a moment say, look, we're different. We're not the same in this, but we're all a part of the same people. We're all a part of the same nation. We need to be able to come together and coordinate. And there's a sadness of sorts that bears mentioning that, like we have today, the cauldron of crisis is so often where unity emerges from. And the fact that some scholars date modern Jewish history from a crisis, a disaster, a blood libel, tells us something about what provokes us to have that national self-consciousness. But it does not end there. There is something even more specifically unique about the moment of 1840. That 1840 was not a random year on the calendar that happened to portend the advent of the locomotive and the telegram. This was a year that had very specific significance in mystical Jewish thought that grasped the attention of all populations in the Jewish community. There's an absolutely fabulous article that I'd be happy to share, any of the larger articles or anything that I quote, by Israel Bartel. He misses a few very important sources that we'll fill in tonight, but he talks about something absolutely remarkable. There is a mystical text that is called the Zohar. The Zohar is a collection over many, many centuries that's attributed to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. That definitely, at its heart is the mystical thought of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and was revealed centuries later in the Middle Ages, in the 1400s. In the Zohar, in Parshas Noach, there is a remarkable statement. It says as follows. I'm going to read the translation. A new age, again, this is how he begins the article. He has the translation a little bit lower down. I'm going to read over here. The Zohar also alludes to the era that began in 1840. This mystical text that has been in our possession for centuries portended, in a way, I don't want to use the word predicted, but it had allusions to the significance of 1840. Starting in the year 5600, the vision of the Holy Zohar, that at that date, the gates of wisdom would be open, was realized. There is a text in the Zohar that says at the end of the 6th century of the 6th millennia, again in the Hebrew calendar, which falls out in the year 1840, 6th millennia, the 6th century. At the end of the 6th century of the 6th millennia, the Zohar, this mystical text, writes, the gates, the lower gates of wisdom are going to be opened up to the world. Now, in Jewish history is scattered with false messianic claims. It's not quite a claim of any messianic revolution, though certainly people interpret it as such. It was predicting, it was announcing that something remarkable is going to change in world history in the year 1840. What made this so remarkable is how this affected and how different communities interpreted this mystical text. And it's not really a surprise, knowing what happened in 1840, and knowing the advent of technology in 1840, some aspects of the Jewish community welcomed this. Wonderful technological revolution. We could break out of the ghetto and the shtetl mindset, and we could finally be an international people. And there were other parts of the Jewish community that were a little bit more cautious, a little bit more nervous. The internet, the locomotive, the telegram, these are conversations we're still having today. There were more conservative elements of the Jewish community that were very concerned by this. This is what Bartel documents in his article that is entitled, again, look at the title over here, Messianism and Nationalism, Liberal Optimism versus Orthodox Anxiety. As we will see, he misreads the Orthodox anxiety because he left out a very significant part of our Orthodox community and how they related to this. But look at where he begins. A new age, I'm starting now from the top of the article, began for our nation in the year 5600, with both its material and spiritual events. Those who reckoned the ends of days had been waiting for that year. That year had already been singled out precisely as if in a prophecy in the Holy Zohar. Thus did Jacob Lifshitz, Yaakov Lifshitz, whose great-great-grandson, I don't know if you get this newspaper here, but there's a Haredi, ultra-Orthodox newspaper known as the Yatid Neman. My guess is most of you are not subscribers to the Yatid Neman. I am not a subscriber to the Yatid Neman, but the Yatid Neman is run by Pinny Lifshitz, who is Yaakov Lifshitz's great-great-grandson. So he's still a big media superstar. One of the most prominent Orthodox activists in the Russian Empire, the author of Zichron Yaakov, the history of the Jews in Russia and Poland, and a consistent opponent of Haskalah, Enlightenment, and Zionism. He was very right-wing. Begin his description of the 7th century of the 6th millennia following the creation of the world. On the basis of a passage in the Zohar, Lifshitz associated the end of the 56th century in the year 5600, 1839, 1840, with hopes of redemption. According to Lifshitz, the apocalyptics calculated that this year was a time set for the redemption, according to tradition. As with every other year concerning which there were allusions to the end of days and redemption, which because of the sins of the generation that did not merit redemption, became a time of untoward events, disasters, and evil decrees, from which heaven protect us, so too they calculated that the year 5600 was a set time, and its many untoward events and disasters are well known. He's describing the technological innovations. He's describing the building of mass highways. He's describing the telegram and the locomotive. He said these were disasters. They uprooted our community. They uprooted the insularity and the closeness and the intimacy that we once felt in our community, and they ripped open doorways of communication that once barricaded and insulated traditions and rituals and commitments that were once so easy to perpetuate and carry on to the next generation. This is a rather pessimistic view of the advent of technology. On the other hand, as Bartel mentions in his article, there were other rabbis, most notably more liberal rabbis, who welcomed these changes. They said, wonderful, we can almost abandon our old traditions and we can kind of embrace technology unfettered and allow ourselves to really embrace an enlightenment that previously we did not have access to. Instead of looking at this as a disaster, they looked at this freedom as the ultimate expression of a freedom from tradition. And these were people who actually suggested, one of the rabbis suggested, said, this is the Messiah. The Messiah is technology. The Messiah is information. And they wanted to abolish any sort of mourning for the Beis Hamikdash. They wanted to abolish any sort of sadness that we had perpetuating a past that they now felt they could finally become detached from. There was a third path, and this is the path that animates my own thought, and I believe animates the moment that we were in. And it was the path not of a very conservative ultra-Orthodox Jew, and it was not the path of a very liberal progressive Jew. It was actually the path of a Hasidic Jew, a controversial Hasidic Jew, but a Hasidic Jew who began a revolution, and that was the Hasidic thought of Ishbitz. Ishbitz Hasidus was a Hasidus that was a break-off from the Polish, from the world of Kutsk and the Hasidic world of Kutsk. I wish I could have enough time to go through all of Hasidic history. If anybody has a background in Hasidic thought or wants to know more about this, do not get me started. I will be going way until 10 o'clock my time. It'll be 10 o'clock your time in Vancouver. I'm happy to share more details offline, but Ishbitz Hasidus was a break-off from the Kutzker Rebbe. The Kutzker, for anybody who's read anything about Kutsk, and there's a wonderful book about Kutzker Hasidus that Rav Avram Yeshua Heschel, Abraham J. Heschel, wrote called The Passion for Truth. The Kutzker was all about truth. The Kutzker was all about elitism and authenticity. Ishbitz broke off from that. Ishbitz said, look, I'm looking at the world now. I'm looking at society. Not everybody can take an express train to truth. Not everybody can ride the express train to truth and live a life of unadulterated commitment to what is exactly emes and truthful. Some people need to ride the local. And what the Ishbitzer created is a Hasidic movement that endowed significance and dignity into the moments of every individual life, no matter where they found themselves. The year that Ishbitz began was the year of 1840. And Ishbitz couched his revolution, the revolution of 1840 on Simchas Torah of 1839, 1840, in saying that the technological revolutions that we are seeing now, the moment that we are in with the telegram, the description that we had in the beginning of Orlando Feige's is actually a unique religious moment that we are in right now. The moment where people are beginning to consider the very definition of what it means to be a human being. It's not freedom from religion, and technology is not a disaster as some Orthodox rabbis would have led you to believe. There's a middle path where it is a freedom for the first time in the economic revolution that took off through capitalism, in the information revolution that took off from the telegram. That for the first time, we're looking at technology almost as our own competition. And what we're beginning to ask ourselves is, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be alive? If I'm looking and I'm having my job replaced by the technology of farming that began to advance in the 1840s, if information is being shared in new ways, then what do the limitations, the fragility of human life offer? What makes it significant? What makes it real? And the Ishbitzer said, this is a unique moment in time to ask new questions about what does it mean to be alive, and what is the responsibility that we owe ourselves to ask questions about our experiential lives and our own consciousness and the way that we interact with the world. And Ishbitz looked at this prediction of the Zohar of 1840, of the gates of wisdom opening up and bubbling up. He said, it's not the technology, but it's the freedom and the fragility that technology forces us to confront. It allows us to confront a world that heretofore we have not had the liberty to ask ourselves. Economically, the way that the world worked before 1840, the way that religion was passed down before 1840, there was a much more deterministic approach. What job do you have? Well, I was trained in the job my father had. Is there fulfillment in my job? Nobody was asking questions like that. Nobody was asking questions of what does it mean to contribute to society in that very real way of trying to find a way to advance history and society forward. people thought of their religious lives. What are you? Are you religious? I don't know. I am what my parents are. There was no exchange of information in a way that people were beginning to consider the porousness of Jewish communal life. But all of a sudden, with the explosion of information, the rapid acceleration of printing spreading throughout the United States and Europe, people had access to information and questions that they were never asking before. Some people looked at this as an utter disaster, not the Ishbitzer. The Ishbitzer said, we need to confront this. We need to confront this moment. We need to be able to confront these questions. Now, I want to finish this historical journey of Ishbitz, and I could talk about Ishbitz all night, but I kind of want to end and maybe even transition into our approach to this. This is all Hebrew. I could send out this source sheet. You could look at it yourself. I want to show you this quote. This is a quote from Yuval Harari, who's an Israeli scholar who's very famous for his book, Sapiens. This is what he wrote in his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. As robots and AI push humans out of the job market, the ultra-Orthodox may come to be seen as the model of the future rather than a fossil of the past. Let me be clear. Yuval Harari is not religious. In fact, he's pretty antagonistic towards Judaism, though he's Israeli and he understands the society. He's not, this is not outreach that Yuval Harari is doing here. He's saying something, a sociological truth. Not that everyone will become Orthodox Jews and go to yeshivas to study Talmud, but in the lives of all people, the quest for meaning and for community might eclipse the quest for a job. And I believe that this is the moment that 1840 was, and this is the moment that we are in now, that we're beginning to see in our lives, as long and short as they are, we are being forced to ask questions about creating and constructing meaning in our lives, that the deluge of information has not made the construction of meaning easier. It's made it much, much harder and much, much more essential. Before 1840, as I mentioned, the meaning that you got in your professional life, in your romantic life, in your religious life, much of it wasn't even a choice. Much of it was based on the community you lived in, the neighborhood you grew up in. All of a sudden, when you have access to all the information, all the possibilities, all of the people, making a choice becomes much harder. A fabulous book, The Paradox of Choice, talks about, and like myself, I struggle with this in my own life. A question that I would ask is, has the access dating apps and all of these things, have they made romantic commitment easier or harder? And I would argue, and I know this in my own life to be true, it wasn't that long ago. I've only been married 6 years, though I look a little bit older. It makes it much harder. Access to information, access to possibilities makes commitment much harder. If the only flavor you're offered is vanilla, it's very easy to choose your ice cream. If you walk into Baskin-Robbins and you have 31 flavors of career, 31 flavors of religious life, 31 flavors of romantic life, 31 flavors of communal life, what shul do you belong to? The generation that we are seeing now is being, I don't want to say paralyzed, but is being confronted to no fault of their own because of the advent of technology. Parallel that 1840 is being confronted with information that is making choice and commitment so much more difficult. And as you all know, constructing meaning is a product of the commitments that we make in our life. And that has made religious commitment much more difficult. It has made romantic commitment much more difficult. And it has made professional commitment much more difficult. And there is an ambiguity in the world that we are living in. How should I construct meaning in this world? I want to share with you one more quote. And this is the final quote, and then I'll give you a peek at the website and a little bit of background. There's a beautiful Gemara in Rosh Hashanah that says that Yiftach, who was one of the great judges mentioned in Tanakh, Yiftach in his generation is like Samuel, the great prophet in his generation. And normally this passage in Talmud is interpreted to be like a runner-up prize. Yiftach, not so famous. Yiftach in his generation, it's like Shmuel in his generation. Look, your rabbi, he's okay, he's good. Rabbi in your generation, he's like the great rabbis of previous generations. You'll have to make do. We don't have the great sages of the medieval era and the Tanaim and the Amoraim. So you'll have to make do with the Yiftach that we have in our generation. Reb Tzadok HaKohen of Lublin, who was a student of the Ishbitzer and who has animated all of my thought, interprets this in a beautiful way. He says Yiftach is not just a noun, it's not just a person. Yiftach is a verb, meaning whoever opens up, poseach, Yiftach, whoever opens up a new entryway in the service of God in their generation is the embodiment of the leadership of Shmuel, of Samuel in his generation. If we could open up a new entryway, if we could open up a new portal to help people construct meaning in their lives, that Yiftach, that opening up is like the leadership of Shmuel, the prophet. And I believe, and I've used the imagery many times, if you look in any major institution or room, you will always see neon exit signs. There's always a neon exit sign, and we have it for fire safety. What we need in our religious lives right now, because they've become so porous, there's so much choice, there's so much ways to leave, we need neon entrance signs. We need portals that allow people to enter and ask questions and confront the difficulties that they find. That is where we began 1840. 1840, not the year, 1840, the initiative. 1840, the initiative is a media site that is meant to confront points of dissonance, not points of cohesion, but points of dissonance in our lives. And I believe there are 3 points of dissonance in anyone's life. There are people who have theological dissonance. They grew up with stories and ideas, maybe that they heard in yeshiva, maybe they heard from their rabbi, a theological idea, and they look at the world and they look at the text and they say, I'm having a hard time buying this. I'm having a hard time swallowing this. I don't know that to be true. Is that really how the Torah developed? Is that really where Jewish law emerged from? I don't understand it that way. That's theological dissonance. We also live in a world now where there's a great deal of sociological dissonance. Sociological dissonance is you grew up with a certain idea about what other Jews are like. You grew up with certain ideas about what non-Jews might be like. And now you live in a world and you look at other Jews and you look at non-Jews and you look at your own Jewish community and say, this does not reflect the stories and the ideas that I was brought up with. And there's a dissonance between your expectations and the reality in front of you. And finally, we have individual emotional dissonance. And sometimes this is the most painful, that we have stories and ideas about what we thought our religious lives would feel like, what our professional lives would be like, maybe our family and romantic lives would be like. And I grew up expecting a certain narrative, and that's not the narrative that I was given. But I tried so hard. I showed up to all the rabbis' classes. But I tried to be a good Jew. How come I wasn't given the meaning that I thought I was entitled to receive? And just like in the calendaric year 1840, when there were expectations about a certain revolution, there are 3 paths in the way that we deal with dissonance. Some people say, look, you're a bunch of evildoers. It's the bad times, the youth these days, kids these days, they're so entitled, they want everything so instant, and you dismiss it. You said, look, it could have been good, you ruined it. And then there's another path that says, look, get away from all the traditions, get away from the community. This is your exit. Look at the neon exit sign. Take the friction and walk out. Walk the other way. This is what the freedom was for. there's a third path, and that's the path of Ishbitz, that looks at the friction and realizes that in order to have momentum, in order to have movement, you need friction. And that it is points of friction and dissonance that actually allow us to propel ourselves to have the most growth. Don't be afraid of the friction, confront it, and use it as momentum to propel yourself forward. Points of dissonance can actually be points of friction that allow yourself to move forward. If you ever try to move forward and run when it's icy outside, and Lord knows in Vancouver that you've had this before in your life, you can't run on ice. You need ice skates, because ice skates take the ice that's very smooth and allow you to have that friction to be propelled forward. I'll share very briefly what the site looks like. This is 1840.org. And if you look at the site, we have the topics that we've spoken about in the past. Social justice. This is sociological dissonance. How come social justice became a big idea in the outside the Jewish world, in the non-Orthodox world? Why don't we hear this more in the Orthodox world? We talk about that here. Science and religion. How does science cohere with religion? Mysticism, Jewish peoplehood. Who wrote the Bible? Comedy. I love comedy. I mean, maybe you didn't get a lot of it tonight, and I apologize for that. We talk about leaving religion, and I talk with people who left Jewish life. It's not just theoretical. I talk to them. Let's talk about those points of frictions. The Talmud, God. Every month we take a new subject. Every month we take a new subject. I'll click on one. We take a new subject and we offer a host of podcasts. Like over here, we have 3 podcasts over here. And then we have an opening video that you can look at on top. This is where the opening video is. We have 3 podcasts, and then we have essays on the side and recommended readings, 3 different books that we recommend that you can read. The reason why the site is structured in this way is because the medium is the message, as Marshall McLuhan famously wrote in the 1960s. Some people like the dynamicism of conversation. Some people just want the article. Let me read something. Some people want a video to frame it. We're not a podcast site, we're not an article site, and we're not a video site. We try to take all 3 of these mediums and use them to convey a message. And every month we talk about a new topic. It's just your luck. It's just your luck that this month is the topic of God. I don't care what topic you look at. And frankly, if this site isn't for you, it doesn't bother me either. I think the underlying message is the message of 1840. Don't look at points of frictions and look at the neon exit sign. Look at points of friction as opportunities for momentum, as opportunities for growth, and a freedom to confront what it means to be human, what it means to be a part of a community, and what it means to be a Jew. I am more than happy to open it up for questions. Rabbi Rosenblatt, you can jump in if there are any. I want to thank everybody. It means so much to me to connect over ideas. And it was really such a privilege and pleasure to be invited to speak with you all tonight.
So the questions that we're going to work with are, I'm going to ask people to send to me in the chat. You should be able to chat only to me and send me questions. There are a couple of questions that people have sent to me, but I'm going to start with.
I haven't figured out who the 100-year-old is.
Her video is not on.
Okay.
So I would tell you that yeah, and she's unlikely to speak, but I know that she's here, and I'm very glad that she's here. So I guess the first question is one of the I guess well we'll say I'll use this question. What do you say to Jewish teenagers when they ask you, why should this whole Judaism thing be relevant to me? You know, I'm looking at the world, and the most important lesson is to treat everybody with respect, and to multiculturalism. The idea that I want to be colorblind, I want to be race blind, I want to be ethnicity blind. Why should Judaism be relevant to me?
That is an extraordinarily important question, and I would probably begin, and we talked a little bit about this on the Jewish Peoplehood podcast, which is I like the imagery that Rabbi Sachs uses when he confronted this question of blessed memory, where he talks about your life, the imagery of looking at your life, not as a series of moments that you exchange for coins, but looking at your life as letters and words. And if you look at your life as letters and words, that every moment of your life strings together to form a sentence, and every year forms paragraphs, perhaps every decade is a chapter, then I believe that an important part of being a life and forming your story is also knowing the stories that came before you. And that a part of your identity and a part of your narrative needs to be the narrative that does live inside you. That's not a definitive reason for why you need to stay specifically in your community, but that to me is a compelling imagery for why, at the very least, the stories that live inside you are worth opening up and examining.
Okay, thank you. So just one other question from the chat, and then I have a question of my own, depending on how challenging you're willing to.
I'm ready for anything.
Okay. One of our participants tonight asks, they would like a specific example of a modern small Jewish community, of something a modern small Jewish community can do that really illustrates the point about how to confront the challenges of today and to turn that friction into positive growth.
I love that question. I think one area, again, you spoke about panels and diversity on panels. I think that diversity of experience and bringing in to your shul people to speak who have diverse experience, even ones that are counter sometimes to the very values sometimes, can offer and allow you to appreciate both what you have and how to cultivate a greater openness or appreciation for why some people leave. I think the topic that I was criticized for most on my podcast on the site, it's neck and neck. I was criticized for a lot, and people tried to. I had people who circled me like I was Baruch Spinoza. I mean, people tried to excommunicate me from the Jewish world. I assure you, I had newspaper articles written about me, but we didn't back down. But one of the topics I got a lot of criticism from was the topic of leaving religion and OTD. And people said,
OTD stands for off the derech.
Off the derech, I'm sorry. Off the derech, leaving the Jewish community. And people ask, how could you sit down with somebody who left the Jewish community? How could you talk to them? I said, I don't get it. In every publication, every super frum publication, I see on the front cover, what can we do to help these people? What can we do to bring them closer? What can we do? But I've never seen any of them actually being spoken to. And I remember an interview, and I don't know, he's involved in a lot of controversy, and he's not a good person. I'm not holding up as an example. But somebody asked Marilyn Manson after Columbine, what would you do, the Columbine Massacre, when 2 kids shot up a school from 1996? Somebody asked Marilyn Manson, who was being blamed for it, incorrectly so, if you read David Cullen's book, Columbine. Somebody asked Marilyn Manson, what would you have done if you could have sat down with these 2 teenagers who turned out to be murderers? What would you tell them? And Marilyn Manson responded, I wouldn't tell them anything. I would listen. And I like that response. And I think that open listening in forums, radical listening, radical empathy to the experiences of others does not have to be scary, even when it challenges our own commitments. And allowing people to speak and share in small groups, even about their own religious trajectory. I'll tell you one thing that I do, and maybe this is too much. I teach a class on religious crisis in YU. I have people chart out their religious narrative like a stock chart. Like a stock chart, like the stock goes up, down. I ask people to chart out, every student to chart out their religious narrative. You could define the highs and lows however you want, but chart it out. Did it go up? Did it go down? Did it go this way? Did it go that way? Chart out your religious narrative. I believe if 5 people got together and each shared their stock chart of their religious narrative from different ages and different demographics, the conversation that would come out of that could be more real and authentic and confronting dissonance in a way that perhaps they have never had before. And I'm so grateful. And I wrote an article about those narratives in Jewish Action that I'm happy to share. But those are the kind of things, that real opening, real sharing about what it means, this whole commitment in our lives, and allowing that conversation to take place, I think is a healthy start.
So my own question is this, and it's a bit of a charged question. So, but I'm liking that you. I'm
happy. Depending on the question is whether I'm going to lie and say, "Oh, I gotta go. It's 11 o'clock my time."
Well, I love that you're taking this on in such a serious way and in such a public way, and I think it's really important. I'm not sure everybody understands how brave it is to do that, and how you set yourself up as an Orthodox site with Yeshiva University, Ner Yisrael faculty who are there.
OU.
What's that?
The OU.
The OU, and at the same time, you're open. You're admitting that there's some very significant challenges there. And I was thinking of first asking you about probably one of the questions that hits me the most as a pulpit rabbi in the Wild West, is the issues of homosexuality. And maybe if we have time, we'll get to that. But I would say one of my most insightful congregants, who probably reads the most, and he reads the things that I write, and he always sends me thoughtful responses. He said to me something which I find very, very hard to process these days, because I find that it rings true. He says that the Orthodox rabbinate has not developed a good self-critical, self-reflective mode. And how would you, let's say I'm coming to you and I'm saying, okay, Rabbi Bashevkin, I love your honesty. I love the way you're handling it, but maybe it's not honest enough. And what do I do with the fact that the people who I look up to in terms of intellectual progress, the Richard Thaler's of the world, or the David Brookses of the world.
I'm gonna get Richard Thaler's books right behind me. It's somewhere.
Okay.
Can't find it.
The people who bring us some of the best insights have tremendous ability for self-reflection, to admit they're wrong, and that same kind of critical churning cycle isn't something that sometimes is seen in the Orthodox rabbinate, especially in the most official channels. And yet there are places in the Talmud where that kind of self-reflection is very much espoused. So let's say I'm a teenager, I'm coming to you with this problem. I just don't see that reflection, that self-reflection in the rabbis. Help me through this religious crisis.
Did you mean to share your screen right now?
Somebody else is sharing their screen. Let me just fix the problem. Okay.
Okay. I love that question. It's a little scattered, so I'm struggling. I'm gonna struggle to give an answer, but I'll say 2 things. Number one, I absolutely agree with you. There are people in positions of leadership, and this is what Max Weber talks about in the struggle between church and sect. He doesn't mean Christian church. He means the development of religion. There's a tug of war between preservationists and innovators. And this is in every denomination. And this is a part of the fabric, I believe, of Torah itself. Totally separate lecture, but I believe this is why most of Torah boils down. The main personalities and background of who developed Torah are Kohanim and Gerim, converts and Kohanim. The Kohanim represent preservationists, and they played a major role in the development of Torah. And converts like Rabbi Akiva and Shammai Vavtalion and Yisro and Onkelos were the innovators. They brought from the outside world. I think that tug of war is healthy, that tug of war is natural, and that tug of war is how we both preserve and advance at the same time. The second thing I will say is you have a luxury that I don't have. Luxury number one is you don't live in the tri-state area of America, and you should make a bracha every single morning when you wake up that you don't live in the Five Towns or Teaneck or Bergenfield or any of these places, because again, there's a lot of great stuff here. We got great restaurants. I love it. I was born in the Five Towns. I grew up in the tri-state area. Most of my family lives here. But I believe part of the issue is that the culture of the tri-state area, the Orthodox culture of the tri-state area, has begun to become superimposed for what it means to be a committed Jew. And that's a mistake. And it is easier when you don't live in the tri-state area to not avoid that mistake. And what I would tell you is the same way I feel no pressure when I wake up in the morning in my accountability to the Jewry of Vancouver, as much as I love you. I don't wake up every morning and say, oh gosh, what are those Jews in Vancouver going to think of me? You don't need to wake up every morning and thinking about what's going on in Teaneck and Bergenfield. And as major and massive and as densely populated and as wonderful as those Jewish communities are, you've created something very special where you are. And just because the rabbis or the leadership or the institutions that are based out of there may be bigger, may be louder, may be more powerful, does not detract an iota from the dignity of your commitment and the prestige of your leadership and what you've built. I sometimes think that the uneasiness, and I'm going to push back a little bit, Rabbi Rosenblatt, with love, but sometimes the uneasiness that we have with the trends in Orthodoxy can come from a little bit of a sense of insecurity and, dare I say, inadequacy, that we go and we travel into a wedding and we see. And I just came back tonight from the Five Towns. My sister lives in the Five Towns. Whenever I come back from there and I see all the rabbis and the infrastructure and everything that they have there, and I come back, I don't live in mainland Teaneck. I live off the grid. I feel a little bit like, is what I'm doing so wow? Is this so great? And I have to remind myself, yeah, it is so great. And what I have is so great. And I don't answer to any other community or any other family but my own. And that sense of investment and dignity that you have here, the leadership that you have here, you don't need to pay attention to whatever's going on in New York or wherever it is. And maybe I'm speaking and I'm saying, Bashevkin, we know this already. And I apologize if this is obvious, and I apologize if this wasn't on our minds. But very often that gravitational pull, because of how densely populated the tri-state area is, how honestly so many rabbis live there, it's a Kohen mentality. It's preservationist mentality. And there's a lot of wonderful things that come out of that, but don't confuse that for what it means to be Jewish, to what Yiddishkeit is. I'm not even avoiding the word orthodoxy. Don't confuse that for what Yiddishkeit is. Orthodox Judaism in Teaneck in 2021, and what it means to be bar mitzvah, and what floor hockey means, and all the stuff that goes on in Teaneck high schools and all that stuff, that is not Yiddishkeit, my friends. It's not the Yiddishkeit that my parents grew up with. It's great, it's wonderful, it's inspiring, but if that's not what you are creating in Vancouver, fine. Who cares? And I think that type of radical confidence in what you are doing is necessary. So again, I embrace self-critical. Can I plug my other book? Should I do that now? Am I going to be invited again if I plug my one more book? All right, Rosenblatt, you have an expression right now that, so help me God, if after plugging your website, you also plug a book, you're never going to be invited back, but I'm going to do it anyways. I wrote a book on sin and failure in Jewish thought. Here it is, right here. Synagogue, S-I-N. And it's about being self-critical. It's about being authentic to who you are and who your community is.
I'll allow this on one condition. This is the condition.
Yes.
I'm intrigued. I loved your last explanation. I would love to probe it more. I'd love to have a second opportunity to talk about, you know, I think it's a beautiful model that, you know, the sect versus the institution. I think that it needs a lot more conversation,
Yes.
especially because, you know, well, there's so many categories of different. That's one of the things that the modern world is teaching us, is how many different ways you can be different. And so this is a fantastic conversation, but one thing I can tell is that, you know, I get people to come back because we can tell them our program is going to be an hour long. So we're going to wrap on this, but I'm glad you shared that book. I'm glad you teased me with it. And I really look forward to having you back again to be able to talk about these issues. I'm very excited about your website, and I really want to thank you for coming on tonight. And I want to just also thank Rabbi Federgren and Rachel Lewinsky, the staff, Jonathan Leipzig, certainly Arnold and Anita Silver, who are our sponsors for tonight, and most especially you, Rabbi Bashevkin, who burning the midnight oil right now to continue to share with us. And you know what? I hope that we can bring you back out to Vancouver. Make you even more liberated.
I want to come out to Vancouver very badly. I really do. Got a lot of great people. I'm seeing Rabbi Stephen Berger in the corner there. I don't know if he's still here or camera's on. I just want to mention one last thing. I didn't get to really talk to that many people here aside from Rabbi Rosenblatt and Rabbi Federgren, and I love them both. Guys, can I give my email address? If anybody wants to reach out to me for any sources that I mentioned, it was quick. The email address is dbashevkin@gmail.com. First letter of my first name and then my last name at gmail.com. I have a so-so track record with response time. So don't hold me to a 24-hour window, but with a little patience, I'm happy to be in touch and connect. And I am so grateful and appreciative for our conversation and the ideas that we exchanged tonight. Thank you so much to all of you, especially Rabbi Rosenblatt, Rabbi Federgren, and everybody else who made this happen. It was really a pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Take care, my friends.
Have a good night, everyone.